My name is McCann. I'm Ireland's ambassador to Canada, and we've hosted an event here called Gratitude. We've planted 3 native trees, the river birch, to create a copse here at the Irish residence in gratitude and commemoration for the generosity of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe and the Wendat peoples who came to us with support during our hour of need in probably the worst year in Irish human history, 1847, Black 47. We're delighted to participate in this. We want to thank the National Famine Museum and Irish Heritage Trust for their commitment to this project and for promoting this project because of the important message that it has. Now, the records we have contain letters from the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe and the Wendat people, and they're very revelatory about their thinking about this humanitarian crisis and about their response to it. They see this very much as a political response by them under the treaty obligations that they had signed. And that's a really important point. The recovery of these letters is shining a light on a page of our history that we had forgotten about. And I really want to pay tribute to those people who have recovered this story, but promoted this story. We know about, for example, the Choctaws of the United States, and they're memorialised rightly in Ireland for the contributions that they made to famine relief. We just simply have not heard this story about the Indigenous of Canada.
We really don't know how this story was lost. There was one sentence in a report given by Lord Elgin in 1847 saying that the Indigenous people were interested in supporting the Irish and Scottish Relief Fund, which had been founded in Montreal in February of 1847. And beyond that, we really hadn't known all that much until a colleague and I stumbled upon the actual letter that petitioned these Indigenous peoples, at least in what is now the province of Ontario, if they would consider giving to help support what they said their white brethren who are starving and dying in Ireland and in the islands and highlands of Scotland. On the 17th of March, St. Patrick's Day, Thomas Anderson wrote the following to all of the bands and nations within his jurisdiction as Superintendent of Indian Affairs. My dear brethren, there are a few of you who have not at some period of your lives felt the cravings of hunger, but a merciful God has thus far preserved you from the miseries of famine, and none of you have seen their children, their fathers or mothers, their husbands or wives dying around them from want of food. Brethren, this is now the lamentable case with some of your white friends. Hundreds in Ireland and Scotland are daily passing into the lands of spirits because they have not enough food to keep them alive. Brethren, your great mother the Queen and all of your white brethren throughout the world are collecting money and other measures to save their lives. You also have the means of contributing to the relief of your suffering and dying fellow subjects. Inform me by letter of the amount you wish to give, and I will forward it to your great Father at Montreal, who is pleased when we show acts of kindness to our fellow creatures. Signed, Thomas G. Anderson. Each one of the letters mentions essentially similar things, particularly the letters that come from various Anishinaabe nations across the province. First, they are greatly distressed by what's happening in Ireland. Secondly, they bring it to council, and they unanimously agree in council that a donation be made. It's then signed with a totem, which is, in the Anishinaabe culture, deeply symbolic. It's not a signature. And so it's significant because the English who would look at the letter would say, well, he couldn't write in English, so he just put a picture. It's much more than that because it's deeply symbolic of a nation reaching out to the distressed of people that they are in treaty with.
So the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee people were as generous as they could be, even though our people were in pretty desperate situation themselves. But it was an act of kindness, and it was an act of honoring the treaties that we have with what our people called our white brethren who were suffering in Ireland at that time.
So when we look at these letters from these different Anishinaabeg council fires and from the Six Nations on the Grand River, offering, as a result of deliberations in council, money from the band funds to be paid to support Irish famine victims, we see in that the upholding of the spirit and intent of alliance relationships, which is the obligation that allies have to undertake to care for each other as relatives. And so here we have the Crown, in the case of the Governor General, requesting of their allies, the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee, assistance for the King's children, who are, in fact, suffering greatly. And so could they find it in themselves to provide relief? And you can see across all these letters, this is, in fact, the call that these nations are responding to. And this practice involved parties negotiating an alliance relationship, and then when they would ratify or renew that relationship, they would do so in a formal public council where they would exchange gifts. And those gifts carried with them really important symbolic meanings. Some of the gifts would be, for example, wampum and wampum belts that would contain the record of the alliance. But other gifts, other material gifts, would be items like clothing, weapons, silver, neck ornaments, and headdresses. In 1845, for example, the present ceremonies were continuing, and there are some wonderful images from Manitoulin Island at the Manitowoning renewal ceremony for all the North Shore Anishinaabe people who were living up around Lake Huron would come to Manitowoning, and the painter Paul Kane was there, so we have these images of what the ceremony looked like. We also have some of the presents that the visitors received as well. These include, for example, these treaty pipes, and You can see on this particular pipe, one of the figures is actually holding his chest as if he's cupping his breasts. And this is actually a reference to mother's milk. And this is actually, again, a metaphorical reference to treaty relationships. When you see this language being used, sort of invoking the kind of care that a parent has for an infant, the kind of obligations that allies have to each other. So this beautiful pipe was gifted back. In this case, this one was gifted to Kane, but gifts were given to other officials with the Indian Department and people who represented the Crown. The Governor General received many gifts, beautiful works of art that also embodied the treaty relationship.
My name is Darren Wybenga. I'm the Traditional Knowledge and Land Use Coordinator for the Mississauga the Credit First Nation. I am reading the letter that Joseph Sawyer and Peter Jones wrote to T.G. Anderson on March 22nd, 1847 regarding famine relief for Scotland and Ireland. Sir, we beg to acknowledge the receipt of your letter of the 17th instant in reference to contributions towards the relief of those perishing for want of food in Ireland and Scotland. We are exceedingly sorry to hear that our fellow subjects in those parts of the world are visited with such awful calamity. Feeling the necessity of rendering aid to such as are in real distress, we gladly subscribe the sum of £12 10 shillings currency out of our land payments, and beg you will have the goodness to pay that amount into the hands of our great Father, the Governor General, that he may forward the same over the great waters. It would have afforded us great pleasure to have given a larger amount, but we regret to inform you that our people here are in a very destitute state, arising from their not having raised any quantity of produce during the last summer, owing to the suspense concerning the removal, and the few potatoes they planted having also proved a failure. We beg also to state that if our people are kept much longer at our villages, their suffering for want of food will be very great, and we shall be obliged to devote larger sums of our annuity to keep them from starvation. We have the honor to be, sir, your obedient servants, Joseph Sawyer and Peter Jones, both signed with their dotem. I find this a very remarkable letter considering our state at that time when the letter was written. We found ourselves just about to be homeless. Our lands at the Credit River were put up for sale, and we had to find a new home. And so in the midst of this, we're contributing to famine relief. We're deeply concerned, we're deeply worried. Where are we going to go? Yet we still find time to contribute to famine relief. And to me, that says a lot about the Mississaugas, I suppose, and First Nations people everywhere. We had to share in order to survive the harsh environment, to live on the land. And so I think it came quite naturally to us to share and reach out and help other people. And so we're very glad to do that because we were no strangers to starvation in our history either. Scarcely 25, 30 years ago, we went through a period of time in our history where we were in a terrible plight. We were on the verge of extinction or disintegration as a band. Our traditional economy had collapsed. The settlers had moved onto our lands, and we were stricken with all kinds of disease, illnesses, starvation. It was awful. And now we hadn't forgotten either. We have a good memory. We have a very good memory. And I think it's only natural that we reached out to help. And I'm very glad we did. It shows you our friendship and alliance as articulated in that first treaty, I suppose, the 1764 Covenant Chain Wampum Belt, where we were seen as allies on the land. I was very happy to note that one of the signatories of the letter was Chief Joseph Sawyer. He's my 4 times great-grandfather, and he was the chief of our band. His name means the sloping sky. I'm very proud that my distant relative had a role to play in this and expressed a willingness to contribute to such a worthy venture. It's truly humbling, even years later, to read of his activities in this matter. So wonderful, wonderful.
Ani, Atikto Dem, Megasekwe Dishnakas, Lori Noswin, Mississauga, Anishinaabe, and Dow. Hello, I'm from the Deer Clan and the Mississauga Nation. My English name is Lori. My spirit name is Eagle Woman, and I am chief of our community of Hiawatha First Nation. Rice Lake, March 27, 1847, to T.G. Anderson, Esquire. Sir, we beg leave to acknowledge the receipt of your circular, and after reading it, we cannot but feel sorry to hear of the distressed state in which our white brethren in Ireland and Scotland are, but are happy to find that our great mother, the Queen, and other great people are considering their situation. Though we are poor indeed and our own wants many, still we feel that we are called upon to do something towards relieving their present distress. We therefore request you to say to our great Father that we subscribe the sum of £10, for which sum we send you a requisition. We are sorry it is not in our power to do more, as our hearts swell with grief at the thought of any of our fellow creatures dying for want of food. We have the honor to be, sir, your observant servants, George Potash, John Crow, John Copaway. This letter I just read brings great pride and honor to me as a descendant of George Potash. George Potash was my 4th great-grandfather, and he was the lead traditional chief of our community and from the Crane clan. And to know that our ancestors back in 1847 were giving even in their own hard times, and that we carry that today. We carry that blood memory, and we carry that we're still giving, we still care, and we don't want to see people suffer. And it makes me understand how we are, how we got to be who we are, and how we still do those pieces that we were taught, even though we didn't understand or didn't know how our ancestors were back then. And I'm very appreciative of all that has been taught to me and all that's been given to me, and how those ancestors guide me and our community and our people today.
Adin Bojo, Gitaga McGowan Dishnakaz, McKinnock, Wabnagig Nro Damag, Dindash Gakmakwa, Curve Lake, Ashkikamong Dunjaba. So my name is Donovan Taylor, and I am the Cultural Preservation Manager at Curve Lake First Nation Cultural Center. And I'm going to read the letter of Shamong Lake Village, April 5th, 1847. Sir, we received your letter informing us of the distress of the poor of Great Britain and Ireland. We have held a council and authorized you to forward £12, 10 shillings out of your annuity, and we further assure you only of our poverty at present, that we would willingly subscribe a larger sum to assist our friends in the British settlements for the friendship we have received from them in former times. Sir Peter Nogi, our chief, and the greater part of our Indians were at the council, and all present willingly subscribed to the above sum. As an Anishinaabe, I feel that it shows how generous Anishinaabe are, First Nations people. Even in our own impoverished times, we gave what we could. And right now, in 2024, we are still giving what we can. We're giving people, our ancestors are giving people, and I'm very proud to be an Anishinaabe, to be from Curve Lake First Nation, and I'm very proud of my ancestors who gave what they could to Great Britain and Ireland. Miigwech.
This letter is a very great example of how all through in our community, in days past, we've always helped out where we can. We take care of people. We have great relationships with the surrounding communities in our area to this day. So we've always built these great relationships, and it's very nice to be able to help out, and I'm glad my ancestors were so generous to do so. Miigwech.
The Chemong letter, or Curve Lake letter in contemporary terms, is interesting because it's the only letter that mentions an engagement between the Mississauga and their local settler populations. And within the context of the letter, they mentioned the friendship that had been extended to them by the settlers in the area, and this was one of the ways in which there was a reciprocity, a friendship extended to the Irish and Scottish during this time of grave famine. So what's interesting about that too, and coincidental, is that the Irish settlers who would have been here in the Curve Lake area and in the adjoining townships would have been largely members of the Peter Robinson settlement of 1825, when dozens and dozens of families from Cork and from Tipperary were settled in this region by the British government. And so we have this rather ironic twist that the Irish Indigenous relationship is both from afar and yet from near. And in some ways, those who were near had a positive experience, and subsequently a donation came from the generosity of the Indigenous peoples of Curve Lake.
Hello, my name is Mike DeGagne. I'm the president and CEO of Inspire. We're an Indigenous charity operating in Canada, and we raise funds for Indigenous university and college students, in addition to acknowledging the excellence that's in our community through the Inspire Awards. I'm originally from Northwest Anglo First Nations in Western Ontario, and I have a letter here from Jacob Crane, dated Lake Scugog, March 30th, 1847, and it is as follows. Sir, I got your letter dated 17th March, 1847, about the Irish and Scotch people who are very hungry and want provisions. I called the council and had your letter explained. All my people are very sorry for the suffering of their white brethren. They are very poor, but they are willing to help their white brethren. We wish you to send word to the Governor General that we desire the sum of 5 pounds of our annuity to be sent to the starving people, either in money or provisions, as the Governor General thinks best. This is all I have to say at present. Signed, Jacob Crane, addressed to Thomas G. Anderson of Toronto. This is a particularly powerful letter, first of all, for its generosity coming from a community that's itself quite poor, but as a charity ourselves here operating in Canada, we are often seen as an organization that is always receiving funds for our needs from other Canadians. And it's important to know that Indigenous people are also on the giving end. And there has been some profound generosity in our community throughout our history. And I think it reflects a great understanding of Indigenous communities that we're here to help not only our own communities, but the communities around us. And so it's a lovely reflection and reminder of that for me.
It gives my soul and spirit a great feeling of warmth to know that my ancestors back in that difficult period were kind enough to send relief funds from their community to the Irish famine relief funds in Ireland. And I have in my hand here a copy of a letter that is dated from Beausoleil Island, the 29th of March in 1847. And it's addressed to a T.G. Henderson, Esquire. And it goes like this. Sir, your brother John Isance, chief of the tribe of Beausoleil Island Indians, has received your letter showing the great distress that exists among the poor people of Ireland and Scotland from the want of food. Your brother has read your letter to the brother of chiefs who expressed great pity for their white brethren and have unanimously agreed to place at the disposal of their great father in Montreal for the relief of our white friends who are suffering of hunger the sum of 10 pounds currency. The sum is small compared with the large sums that we are told has been sent to our white friends by their brethren, but we are poor and give to the best of our ability with willingness. I am, sir, your humble and faithful friend, John Isance. When I read this letter and realized that as poor as we were, having gone through a number of difficulties and famines ourselves after colonization in the early 1800s and the War of 1812 that we had participated in and had helped the British secure Upper Canada, or British North America as it was called, for the British, that we were ignored afterwards, and we were living in quite difficult times on various tracts of lands, and the authorities came to us and asked for donations, and we willingly gave. And this is just one letter of quite a volume of letters that represent donations that came from Canada to the Irish Relief Fund in those days. And I'm very proud that my people were there reaching out across a great ocean to our Irish brethren at that time. So, Megwech, as we say in Ojibwe, thank you.
I'd like to read a letter from 1847 in response to a plea for help for the distressed people of Scotland and Ireland. And the letter goes as follows. To our great father, Earl of Elgin, Governor General of British North America. We, your red children, residing on Snake Island, having heard of the distressed state of the poor in Scotland and Ireland, wish to help a little with your white children in sending food to the hungry. Father, we humbly pray you will sanction our request and pay out of our annuities 5 pounds currency into the Scotch and Irish Fund. We, your red children, will ever pray the Great Spirit to bless you and Lady Elgin and make you a blessing to your white and red children of these provinces. That is all we have to say. And it is signed in behalf of the tribe Joseph Snake and James Snake with their dotem. This is a powerful symbol of what we now know as treaty. There's a saying that goes that we are all treaty people, not just Indigenous people. And we have entered into this treaty and each have obligations, not just to our own communities, but to each other, reciprocal obligations. And I think it's really interesting that this letter is a fine example of that, of a community that has little itself, but has this sense that if we are to move forward with, let's say, reconciliation, that we have obligations to our friends and neighbors and other communities, even people we have never met. So it's a profound sense of obligation within both treaty and within community and within the spirit of reconciliation. This is a letter also from 1847 and is from the reserve at Sarnia, also in response to the plight of the people of Ireland and Scotland. And it reads, "Father, we have heard that a dark cloud is resting upon a part of the dominions of our great mother, the Queen, and thousands of her white children in Ireland and Scotland are suffering from famine and disease. Our hearts have been pained at this, and we desire to express our sympathy with the sufferers and assist them a little. It is very likely many of those who are now greatly distressed have contributed to send us the gospel of Christ, and gratitude would require that we remember the poor children of our Heavenly Father. We rejoice to hear that some of our red children have given a portion of their annuity for relief of the distressed, and we are resolved to do likewise. We have therefore enclosed a requisition for which you will be pleased to request the Governor General to accept as our donation towards the relief fund of the distressed in the places mentioned." And we know now that was £20, signed, as I said, at the reserve at Sarnia. This letter is, I think, of particular interest because of how much obligation it conveys and its profound sense of community.
Swagwego, Diawandati Negyaso, Otahione Wagisha Ganyank Hiono Newak. My English name is Susan Hill, and I come from 6 Nations of the Grand River Territory, and I work as an associate professor in the departments of history and Indigenous studies at the University of Toronto. I've had the opportunity to learn about donation that came from my community at 6 Nations of the Grand River to support Irish famine relief in 1847. What's really interesting to me about that letter, first, is that it had a major number of signatories from chiefs of the day, including folks like Henry Brant and John Smoke Johnson, who are well-known chiefs of that time. But it also demonstrates the functioning of our traditional council at the time in terms of working together to make decisions for the benefit of our community. What's not in the letter itself is quite brief, but what's not in there is a context for that support that our community undoubtedly would have had at the time. Understanding that not long prior to that, we had experienced famine ourselves when we were refugees at Fort Niagara. We also suffered crop failures in our new homelands on the Grand River in the early 1800s. And so we know what it is to be hungry. We knew what it was to fear for the health and well-being of our children. And so our leadership of the day decided that it was important for us to help the people in Ireland who were experiencing famine, experiencing this concern for the health and well-being of their children. And so even though they had their own precarious financial situations to try to manage, they thought that it was important to send support to folks who were experiencing things that we had experienced ourselves in our own history. Now,
Tanida has Nyungets, Waganyachta, Ganyokehaga, Niwagonhozoda, Gatekantiduagano. My name is Nathan Brinklow, Director of Indigenous Studies Program at Queen's University. I'm Mohawk from the Tyendinaga Mohawk Territory, which is the Mohawks at Bay of Quinte, just south and west of Ottawa on the north shore of Lake Ontario. I'm going to read the letter that was written by the leaders of my community on 17th of April, 1847. To T.G. Anderson, Esquire, Visiting Superintendent of Indian Affairs. They write, "Father, we, the undersigned chiefs of the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte, beg to return to you thanks on behalf of our tribe for your circular letter suggesting that we contribute something towards the relief of our suffering fellow subjects and Christian brethren in Ireland and Scotland. We feel we have too many poor among us to give much, but we beg you will accept the sum of £12, 10 shillings currency as a small proof of our sympathy with them, and we hereby authorize you to apply for the same to be paid out of the annuity accruing to us from government for lands ceded to us by the Crown. With much respect, we remain your obedient servants, Brant Brant and Paulus Claus. This letter being first read and fully explained in the presence of us, Saltern Gibbons, the missionary, and Isaac Hill, the interpreter. As I read this letter and subsequent conversations and correspondences received to and from the community, it really strikes me the generosity that the community showed to their fellow brethren, fellow Christian brethren and suffering subjects in Ireland and Scotland. And while some people may think that, well, did they really have a choice to donate, given the circumstance and the situation, I really think that it is genuine. They take the opportunity to remind the superintendent, which they imagine they did at every opportunity, of their own suffering. But I think that shows for us their sympathy and the way they connected with the people in Ireland and Scotland, because they understood the suffering. They understood the difficult situation they found themselves in because they themselves had been in a similar situation and they themselves were in a difficult situation. And so thinking through the connection across an ocean in the 1840s, while they may not have known exactly the people, and it was such a distance between them, they really did have this common connection of suffering. And Mohawk would say, that the suffering that it can come with sickness or illness, but that thing that in your heart that makes you heavy and brings you down.
That letter from Tenega, it made me think about the contributions of Indigenous people in Canada that have not been told. Very clearly, the community was not in a position to be able to give much, for as they said to themselves, how they were poor. But they were willing. They were willing to give, in spite of the fact that their own people were not rich, that they were in poverty themselves. But it showed the care and empathy to others, and the importance to be able to help others as well. As I think through the letter itself, it is one of these untold stories in which many people here in Canada do not know of. The stories of others are always put forward, and when it comes to First Nations people, Métis, Inuit, those stories are not put forward in a way that as contributors to this country, as being part of building. It is usually done more of a negative tone or as a burden, that they draw away resources. And this shows the opposite, that there was a request and they didn't hesitate to reach out to help and to contribute what they can. And so what I hope people understand is that we're not here to necessarily rewrite history, but to expand that story and to include those perspectives and voices that have not been included, that are not taught in schools, that are not taught in education, or are very superficial. And to then truly understand how different communities engaged with a ever-changing society that they were involved in. But they didn't withdraw from it, that they still contributed, they were part of it as well. And so I really encourage people to continue seeking out these type of narratives, and that they come for the forefront so they can work alongside with the narratives that we hear about now.
Being a language learner and a language teacher, one of the things that really struck me was at the very end. It's almost as a note at the end of the letter, being fully explained and translated in the presence of us being the missionary, Saltern Gibbons, and the translator, Isaac Hill. And it occurred to me that as a language teacher in a community that suffered great language loss, that I really wish I could have been there for that conversation, to hear this fully explained and translated, but to hear it in the original language. And then from there, it occurred to me that you could say the same thing on the other side, when whatever the donation, however it went, was given. Like, you could say the same thing, being fully explained and translated, not into Mohawk, but into Gaelic. And so we took our thoughts and our sympathies in one language, and we packaged them up into another to send them across an ocean to be translated into another language, both of us communicating in the language of our colonizer. And so it really struck me as this connection, not only of sympathy, but it's another way that the situations were related, that we're both dealing with the same situation with Britain, and we have this similar and shared history. So one of the things I wanted to do, or thought about doing, was to translate the letter, to re-voice the letter into a form, to give them back the words that they might have said. And obviously I don't know, I can't ever say this is what they said, but something that they could have sent, something they could have written to the Deputy Superintendent of Indian Affairs or to the Irish. Gontege, Onoratoka Zada Yawarne, 1847. Gotnizera, I ne dage, yunda dat sonara, rodianer ne ganyanke haga ne gotege. Guatnegani, amdaya guatgatwe ne nyawa, tinung guadi ne ungwantokwa. Ne ti, Deze wachadun seranyadu, zeriwatnuta, amdaya guayeste, ti ayakiena wase, ahunda trugwa, di rodirunyago ne rodiriosto ungwadadego, ne Ireland dano gontaharege taditero. Yagwanuntunyo sozi ronatokwawana rodidontenyo ne gonto, ne zon isinunwe yagwadenyede. Nekji, aizawatundado gadi aizawayena diktigo, yung guaquenya ne degan iware sa te wasana ni gawistage di nigo. Ni oriwa a di wa agweneste di yung guat ni gohrakson sta derriwake. Ne gadi oni, guayan eron sarahawis aizawarti wanunduse, ne gagorasara, ne sagot di nigo anduntkawe, to anduderago di nat deo sarage yaguayenas, ne owista, yung guatgawa ne ohunza, crown ne radinat dunkwa. Gagwanyat ston sarago nung guadi di yung guadadano daun ayaguachnenu. Brant, down on Paulus Clause.
Okay.
It